Perils of Perception. Why We're Wrong About Nearly Everything. Bobby Duffy, Atlantic Books, 2019. Many useful tips too. Realize that our perception of many topics does not line up with reality. Understand the cognitive tricks that make us fall into mistaken ways of thinking. Have a bit more optimistic picture of the future and the present, thanks to the understanding that not everything that is sold as a tragedy is true. The author, Bobby Duffy, is the CEO of Ipsos Mori's Social Research Institute and Global Director of Ipsos Social Research Institute, whose speciality is market research. There he spent years carrying out statistical analysis, mostly on public opinion and media exposure. He often participates in conferences, both as a speaker and a commentator, and he's been invited to numerous TV shows. Duffy has written articles for media including The Guardian, The Sunday Times, The Wall Street Journal, and The Huffington Post. Are we surrounded by perils, or is our perception wrong? Over the past 10 years, Bobby Duffy studied public misperceptions with hundreds of surveys carried out in dozens of countries. These studies touched upon private topics, such as health and sexuality, as well as hot topics such as crime and immigration. What came to light is the fact that regardless of the country, the level of education or income, we almost always have a perception that is far from reality. These wrong perceptions can sometimes be harmless, but in many cases they hide a much deeper problem. Distancing ourselves from reality, which can lead us to not only making bad decisions due to misinformation, but also make us victims of manipulation from politicians, companies, and mass media. There are 5 points we must keep in mind about our misperceptions. 1. Many of us have an incorrect understanding of social and political facts. 2. We depend on what we are being told just as much as on how we think. 3. On many occasions, our misperceptions are biased by our emotional responses, which influence our perception of reality. 4. Understanding the reasons behind our misperceptions can help us make changes, individually and collectively. 5. Not all hope is lost. The world is not getting worse. It actually keeps getting better, and we are not enslaved by the mechanisms behind our wrongful perception of reality. What data do we rely on when judging a healthier lifestyle or the health of the community we live in? There are vast amounts of information on healthy ways of eating and living, which comes from sources such as specialized magazines or TV shows that provide advice, guidelines, and secret formulas to stay in shape. However, when it comes to evaluating the health of the community we live in, we tend to have quite erroneous ideas, underestimating factors like obesity or sugar consumption. At the same time, we are inclined to believe that these are the problems of those around us, and that our own lifestyle is much healthier than that of others. Why do we have such a distorted view? The explanation is not simple, and it has to do with the way we process information. Human beings prefer to use the information that's readily available to evaluate a situation, even if it is not precise. Just think of how mass media tackles these problems. They speak about epidemics and the propagation of behaviours considered to be harmful, thus projecting them on a large scale. This does not encourage us to examine the problem as something within our control in order to even see it as a problem. Instead, it is being shifted to the community, which leads us to consider this problem as something normal. The misperceptions born of taboos. In spite of the fact that sex is a fundamental part of human life, this topic is not usually open to discussion, which creates a minefield of misperceptions. From the frequency of sexual intercourse to teen pregnancy rates, our ideas are often far from reality. Why do we think that teenage pregnancies are more common than they really are? Part of the reason are the attention-grabbing stories spread by the media. It is doubtful that we will ever see a TV show sharing the number of teens that don't get pregnant when they are 16 years old. However, media outlets are not the only ones to blame. Our minds are much more keen to remember those events that are far from our normality, granting them more importance. Yet, we should not see the things from a negative point of view. Our misperceptions and susceptibility to negative stories are neither universal nor unsurmountable. Our mind focuses too much on the short-term effects while ignoring the future. Money is yet another complex issue that changes over time. How many people, for instance, have decided to have children, acknowledging the true cost of that choice? One of the most common biases that affects our reasoning is the excessive attention we pay to the short-term effects of our choices, without really taking the future into consideration. Another aspect of finance that we mistakenly assess is the amount of young people still living with their parents. Why do we have such a false perception of this phenomenon? Our answers can give us some interesting clues. It doesn't matter how hard we try to give a precise answer. Our sense of overconfidence takes place on a subconscious level when we make a judgment on a topic that is meaningful to us. Immigration and religion, the topics that can trigger emotional responses and attitudes. Immigration and religion are two of the most divisive issues in the world today, and our way of perceiving these realities is worrying, not only in regards to the scale of these phenomena, but also concerning their nature. Numerous studies have proven that the population of almost all the countries in the world overestimates, and frequently by a huge margin, the rates of immigration and religious minorities. On the one hand, this perception derives from a response to what we fear, and on the other hand, it is fueled by strongly politicized media coverage, whose goal is to gain audience, even if it happens at the cost of the quality and truthfulness of the news that is being discussed. Oftentimes, the stories we are being told are nothing more than anecdotes, purposely filled with well-studied details meant to provoke an emotional response in us. This way, they will have a greater impact on us, and therefore we will tend to remember them longer. And how do we react when we are confronted with the facts? Do we realize our mistake and change our minds? No, we do the opposite. Usually, when we are provided with data that conflicts with our perceptions, we consider that to be a confirmation of a conspiracy, and we tend to consolidate our ideas, even if they are wrong. This should make us reflect upon the importance of distinguishing facts from the stories that are presented to us with the purpose of instigating certain reactions. Even though confronting people with facts oftentimes has a contrary effect, we cannot ignore the truth. The power of mass media and our perception of danger. These days, the world is more dangerous than ever. Crime keeps on growing, and citizens are increasingly endangered. Many politicians make such claims to carry out their electoral campaigns. But how real is the danger? Statistics don't seem to confirm an increase in criminality, and in fact, the opposite is true. Let us take homicide, for example. The word itself already elicits an intense feeling of anxiety. But the reality is that homicide rates are in decline, and they have been for many years. So how come we keep hearing that there is a growing danger? On the one hand, there is our tendency to overestimate things that personally worry us. But this alone is not enough to justify such a skewed perception. On the other hand, it should also be considered that our way of seeing homicide has changed over time. From honor killings to the death penalty, our perception of what a homicide is has changed. Besides, as always, we should keep in mind the effect of mass media. The perception of politics conditioned by our beliefs and the information we are fed. Politics often produces disengagement among citizens who feel disillusioned and do not identify with their representatives. Yet, the disengagement rates are not as high as many think. It is perfectly normal that many of us are not fully informed in the field of politics. It takes time to get informed, especially nowadays, when it is hard to tell true information from fake news. Add to that the fact that many don't believe that their vote will make a difference, and the transformation from an active citizen to an uninterested one happens fast. But rigorous information does exist. We just have to search for it. Our opinions change depending on the incoming information, so why let this process be passive? Another factor that has an influence on our political views, apart from the information we receive, is that of our beliefs. A politician who expresses ideas that are in line with our beliefs will, without a doubt, have more credibility in our eyes, which in turn will influence our political preferences. Brexit and Trump. Wishful and wrongful thinking. When speaking about misperceptions, deviations from reality and misinformation, two recent events will pop up in our minds: the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States and the Brexit referendum. Both events were driven by emotions, but also by reason. Both campaigns appealed to public reaction after making claims that were not necessarily truthful, but definitely effective. In many cases, our choices are influenced by what we are being told, but we are usually the ones who search in the speeches of others for the confirmation of our ideas, our fears and our hopes, even if those words are based on false information. Data analysis that can show us how reality is manipulated. The new technology around us brings with it lots of data, in volumes we could not even imagine a few years ago. Those who have an email account, social media, or any other online service are unwittingly contributing to a huge collection of data. Even though these companies cannot get into our minds, there is a real risk that algorithms, based on data analysis, will manipulate the information we receive. This could be done to provide us with a distorted perception of reality, which can therefore influence our behaviours, from our purchases to our political preferences. The volume of false information, shared without bad intentions, and misinformation, manipulated information disseminated with a hidden agenda, is so huge that it makes it difficult to acquire correct and precise facts. There is a risk that we will end up in a sort of bubble from which we will see the world the way we want to, and that this vision will be shaped by the information provided to us and our bias. Analyse social compromise and the state of poverty. The phenomena that were considered until now an issue in the one single state can in reality be seen on a global scale. One of the concepts that are most frequently wrongly interpreted is that of foreign aid provided to developing countries, in addition to greatly overestimating the capital invested by governments in supporting those countries. We also tend to underestimate their effects. In the last decades, we have seen a substantial decline in absolute poverty, illiteracy, infant mortality, and many other negative factors. Yet, as we have observed, we tend to focus on the negative. This has given rise to a new optimist counter-movement. Members of this group are trying to present a more positive picture of reality. Obviously, this movement has unleashed harsh criticism and cynicism by those who still see the glass half empty. While Italy is a nation that is usually wrong and how to manage its misperceptions. The data collected from hundreds of surveys, statistics and studies made it possible to create a misperception index of countries where people are usually wrong. The bad news is that Italy is first place, closely followed by the United States. However, before losing all hope, it is worth at least trying to understand the possible causes. It is an extremely complex phenomenon. Thus, it is impossible to offer a detailed analysis of each factor, but we can identify some of them. Emotional expressiveness. In countries with the highest emotional expressiveness, where people tend to raise their voices in a discussion or gesticulate while talking, people usually have the most emotionally charged responses. Education levels. Italy and the United States are among the countries that perform worst on math and reading. This correlates with the difficulties these populations experience when interpreting statistics and analysing facts. Media and politics. It seems that there is no positive correlation between freedom of speech and a false perception of reality. Knowing these correlations can help to have a better understanding of this phenomenon, and therefore the ability to manage it. All of the discussions about our misperceptions start off with the premise of searching for external causes. We are only convinced that we are wrong because we are being manipulated, and not because our mental processes lead us to be mistaken. As we have already seen, the reality is that there is no single cause. Our biases are programmed by our brain, therefore there is no way of completely eliminating them. Besides, technology facilitates and sometimes even contributes to the spread of misinformation. What can we as individuals do to try to limit the negative consequences of this situation? These 10 pieces of advice are a good start. 1. Realize that things are not as bad as we think. On the contrary, most things are getting better. 2. Accept the emotion, but challenge the thought. 3. Cultivate skepticism, but not cynicism. 4. Understand that other people are not as similar to us as we may believe. 5. Avoid focusing on extreme examples, since they lead us astray. 6. Try to see the world without any filters. 7. Make an effort to improve our critical, statistical, and news literacy, even if we know that these are going to be difficult to shift in the short term. 8. Be aware that facts still count, and fact-checking is important. 9. We need to try to tell the story. 10. Try to be more profoundly and better engaged in the world that surrounds us. There is no magic formula that can manage our misperceptions. They spread and consolidate because they are based on our cognitive processes. This is precisely the reason why it is important not to surrender to them, but keep asking ourselves questions and casting doubt on what we believe in. Perhaps we will never be able to free ourselves from misperceptions, but we will be able to find a way of making them useful for our daily life. We can learn a lot by simply understanding why we are often wrong. Quotes. Misperceptions differ from ignorance insofar as people often hold them with a high degree of certainty and consider themselves to be well informed. Brendan Nyhan. The fact that we like a story doesn't give the media free rein to feed on misperceptions. This is not at all surprising, as we get the vivid anecdotes we want, and negative information draws and holds our attention more than positive information. Take-home message. Religion, economy, crime rates, sex. All these are controversial topics that generate strong opinion based on what we know. Yet our perception of these phenomena is almost always wrong. Why does this happen? On one hand, we have mass media that provide us with a distorted vision of facts. On the other hand, our mind is instinctively geared to select the information that should be granted with most importance. Knowing these mechanisms is crucial if we don't want to be exposed to manipulation and live in a prefabricated reality.